how's it going? My name is Jay and welcome to the channel, and welcome back to Sannikovland in Planet Zoo. For those of you who are new here, Sannikovland is my current project in Planet Zoo. We're working on building this really large modern zoo in this lovely lush tropical environment, and if that sounds good to you, please do consider subscribing to kind of keep up with this content, and of course do like the video if you did like today's video. And with that out of the way, let us get into what is going on screen and what I'm bringing to you today, which is in fact probably the longest episode of Sannikovland so far, and for good reason. We are building a very large project today. In fact, quite a large area is being used here, so I decided to build it away from the rest of the zoo because I do have some ideas for what we're going to fill in the middle. But because this was such a large project, I didn't want it to be quite so densely stuck in with everything else. And I thought we should probably put it off to one side. And I chose this little corner of the African section, which would work perfectly for what I am going to call the Nile Amphitheatre. Now that's one of those big cheesy zoo names that you see for a lot of these things. And I thought it was, pretty suitable for what we're going to be building. Because we are going to be featuring the hippopotamus, the Pygmy hippopotamus, and the Nile monitor, two of which are, native to the Nile River, which are the common, the regular hippopotamus, and of course the Nile monitor. The Pygmy hippo is more native to like forests and places like Sierra Leone, but not necessarily the Nile River itself, which is for the other two. I would have loved if we had a Nile crocodile. That would have been perfect to fit into this area, but alas, we do have the hippo instead. And you guys, if you follow the channel for a while, you know how much I love the Pygmy hippopotamus. I personally think it is the single cutest animal in the game. And if you've seen, I made a video way back in the beginning of my channel titled Top 10 Animals in Planet Zoo, where I ranked my favorite animals in the game based on how well they, work for the game and just their appearance and stuff like that. And Pygmy hippos were number 2 because they're the absolute best. They're so cute. I do think the baby Pygmy hippopotamus in this game, and of course in real life, is quite possibly the single cutest living organism on the planet. Maybe there's an exaggeration, I don't know. I still think they're amazing, so we'll leave it at that. But yeah, we do have a longer episode today, and it's going to be a very, very big build. So as you can see already, we've started the path work. So as we go along, of course, we are going to get into 3 different species profiles. We're going to talk about the buildings on, all the buildings I'm doing on screen, and just talk about this project in general. And because it is such a long episode, why don't you, go ahead, pause this video, go grab a snack, come back, just, chill out, relax, and we'll watch this and, talk about what we're going to do here. So yeah, go for that. And well, let's start by talking about what's going on screen. So you may have noticed I'm building at a little bit of a corner of the zoo. So we got a little bit of a 90 degree meetup, a curved 90 degree meetup, if that makes any sense, between these two path areas. And so we got this nice curvature, which I thought would fit in one of those kind of seating areas that you see in like zoos where you have like presentation stages and stuff like that. I thought this would be a nice little thing to add here. I imagine this is an area you could use for wildlife presentations, bird shows and things like that. But for the most part, it is a hippo habitat. And, when there are not shows, it is very much just a viewing area. So that's what I'm doing here, is putting in that little bit of a stadium type seating area. Of course, because this is at a bit of a weird curve, like it's not perfectly 90 degrees, the two path connections, so it is a little bit tricky to get all of these lined up nicely. And of course it took me quite a long time to kind of tidy them all up and get them to look somewhat decent, so you'll see me kind of fiddle around with things quite a bit. And you're going to see me use a ton of plaster pieces because I love plaster pieces and they're just so versatile. And if you've seen Sannikovland for a while now, you would have seen me put down plaster pieces everywhere. And when I say everywhere, I mean everywhere. Literally all across the park. Now, this little thing I'm building on screen is actually a little planter. It's going to help kind of divide up some of the areas here. But this area we're building in is actually a lot more complex than I thought it was going to be to build in here. I in fact tried to do this whole habitat setup maybe 2 or 3 times, and usually I got as far as starting with the seating and then giving up, and then eventually, I think a couple of days ago, I finally sat down and said to myself, you know what, let's just go with it. If it doesn't look perfect first try, I'll just kind of push through, and at the end we can always take a break from it, see what works, see what doesn't, and come back to it and sort that out. So that is a little bit of advice for you guys as well. I think it really works. So if you're ever struggling with the build, if you're not quite feeling it, what I would suggest is just go for it anyways, build it till you're kind of like mostly finished, and then take a step away, go take a break, go, get some coffee, something like that, whatever, and then come back to it later on, and you'll be so much more refreshed. Like taking a little bit of a break from whatever you're building to just go away and not think about it gives you so much more perspective when you come back, and you can really get a better idea of what needs to change, what doesn't need to change, and I found that super helpful in this build. So quick guide to what's actually the layout's going to be like. So in the middle, of course, we do have this stadium type seating area. On either side we have slightly elevated kind of squares where there will be some picnic tables where people can just kind of sit at a slightly high angle. And of course the interior of the curve is going to be an underwater viewing section, because common hippos of course spend so much time underwater. If you go to a zoo, they're either going to be lounging in the water or they're going to be asleep on land, but they'll rarely ever be walking around on land. So most of the time you're going to see them in the water, which really makes sense for me to have this kind of underwater viewing area be the primary way to view the hippos, and the land areas kind of being a secondary element. And speaking of these animals, because we do have so many species profiles today, I will kind of split them up, and we'll start actually by talking about the common hippo. I'll just get that up on screen right now. So this is the common hippo, which is Hippopotamus amphibius, which is not the most creative scientific name of all time, but I don't blame them. Anyways, these guys are vulnerable. Unfortunately, they do have declining populations across Africa, which is quite a shame. They used to range a lot wider across Africa as well, but now their range has been diminished somewhat. One thing that's really interesting is their size. So here I put a size limit as up to a certain weight, but this time I put it from a certain weight because these guys get huge. The weight range seems to be not quite like set in stone. Nobody seems to know like the exact maximum they can get to, which is understandable, but it seems to range from 1.5 tons all the way to a potential 4 tons. Imagine a 4-ton hippo. That's crazy. That's 4,000 kilograms. It is insane. And they get very long as well, 4 meters or so, which is about 14 feet. Very, very large animals. They of course live in very wet environments, lakes, rivers and marshes, and they will occasionally walk across the savannah, but very rarely just to get to another water source. You will rarely, if ever, find these guys away from water. They do have pretty long lifespans, 50 years or so, and in captivity they do live quite long as well, even longer than 50 years sometimes, 55 or so. And their diet comprises almost entirely of grasses and aquatic plants, though they have even been seen eating small animals, which is kind of crazy. Now let's get into some interesting facts about the hippos. So first off, this is the 3rd largest land animal on the planet, which is again insane. These guys are only outweighed by elephants and hippos. Elephants and rhinos outweigh them. They are huge. And because of their size and their aggression, these are known as the most dangerous animal in Africa. Obviously discounting things like mosquitoes, which are tremendously more dangerous, but let's not talk about them. We'll talk about the hippos. Hippos are extremely, extremely dangerous. They're beautiful, magnificent animals, don't get me wrong, but oh my god, they are very aggressive, very territorial, and because of that, they are extremely dangerous. They have been known to bite canoes in half. Like even the crocodiles in the Nile crocodiles, don't mess with these guys. They don't even come close. They stick to their side of the river and they avoid hippos at all costs. Same goes for other predators on the savannah. Lions will never be seen going close to a hippo, and if they do, they are not going to win that fight. hippos have skin which is up to like 6 centimeters thick, if I'm not mistaken, so they can take a bite or a claw very easily. And their tusks are massive, huge tusks that can easily take down any predator. So yeah, don't mess with a hippo. That's the story of that. And I've seen a few hippos up close. There's actually a wetland nature reserve not too far from my house, and we have some like introduced hippos to a lake there. They're not like wild or anything. They are within kind of a boundary area. There's a fence, but of course it's like a huge lake, so they got lots of space and it's more natural than say a zoo. But I've seen them up close because they do feeding sessions, and the hippos will come up to the fence, open their maw, and you can like, sorry, not you, the keepers will give them fruit like watermelons and stuff. And essentially, you could put in like any fruit or anything, and within seconds the hippo would just completely obliterate it with its tusks. Extremely cool. Very, very cool to see in person. But definitely not cool if it's you within that maw. So if you see hippo in the wild, I don't know why you would, but if you see a hippo in the wild, please don't approach it, because yeah, all the reasons I just stated. Another cool thing is their sweat is actually red in color and quite oily. That is a substance that they secrete to actually protect them from the sun. It has in fact given rise to a bit of a myth that they bleed out of their skin all the time, but that's not blood. It is in fact this substance. I'm not entirely sure what it's called. It might be something like hypolyric acid. It's actually an acidic compound, but it does protect their skin from the sun, which is a very cool adaptation they have. And they also share that with the pygmy hippos, which we'll talk about later. And they live in huge groups. In zoos, often you'll see them in groups of about 2 or 3, which is about the minimum. But they live in very, very large groups in the wild. I'm sure you've seen documentaries of the Serengeti and the river crossings, and you always see massive, massive groups of hippos. Like, they're all just, piled together in a river, just kind of hanging out. So they do live in very large groups, and they communicate quite well with each other using grunts. They can clap their tusks together, make a lot of different sounds essentially. And speaking of where they live in the water, they can actually spend up to 16 hours of their day in the water, which is pretty cool. But that's it for the hippos. Very, very cool animals. I really think they're amazing, and thinking about it now, I probably chose the wrong animal to start the video on, because on screen that we're going back on, we're actually building the Nile monitor habitat. So very quickly you will have seen me fill up this gap here with some water, and I'm starting to build the indoor Nile monitor habitat. Here's the issue I have with this. In the game, the Nile monitor requires about 300 square meters of space or something like that. And that's not a bad requirement. It just feels a little bit large, because Nile monitors, generally speaking, I don't think they would necessarily benefit from having a full 300 meters. Of course, more space would be better, but these guys do live in little burrows and along rivers and stuff like that. And of course, they do range distances when they're swimming, but when they are secure, they don't tend to move an awful lot except to hunt. And if they're getting a steady food supply, they might not necessarily feel the need to move around a lot. So that minimum requirement might be a bit high, but I don't mind that at all. So one thing you're going to notice is this habitat might look a little bit small. Once I put in the Nile monitor, you'll notice it is pretty decently sized, but I think it's a pretty good kind of size for it, and I think the Nile monitor is pretty happy with it. It just about meets the requirements in game, so I'm quite comfortable with it. Anyways, this should remind you a lot of our first ever habitat built in Sannikovland, which was the capuchin monkeys. They had a very similar kind of indoor type habitat. Of course, they didn't get a water area, which is quite cool actually. I like this water area because it is a little bit higher up, so that even if you're on ground level, you can view a little bit into the underwater area itself. So I thought that looked pretty nice. Anyways, filling it a lot with these tropical plants, and of course a lot of aquatic plants. Giving them a little bit of a log in the water for them to perch on. Of course they can't in the game, but in real life they would definitely make use of that. Of course, adding in the little bits of enrichment. This building was a lot of fun to build, but it was a little bit frustrating at times just because of the issue of building in slightly more confined spaces. That's just a general issue. If you're building in a small space, it can be quite difficult to kind of maintain the sort of neatness that you might want. So it is a little bit tricky. of course, I'm lining everything with these rock pieces. Of course, I imagine them to be artificial rock. Can't imagine the zoo would use like actual rock for a lot of this because it would be incredibly hard to move, but a lot of zoos do use artificial rock pieces for a lot of different habitats, and I can imagine they would use that here as well. So, other than the rock pieces, there isn't a lot else to do with the Nile monitor habitat here. I do add in a little bit of foliage on the outside. Here you can see me adding in some reeds. The reeds actually really help in this whole area, the whole of the Nile Amphitheatre, because it really brings that kind of element of the riverside to the forefront, makes it look like, okay, this is what you're going to be expecting, this is what you're going to be getting, you know. So I thought that worked out pretty well. The Nile monitor itself, shall we actually get to the species profile of that? We'll do species profile of that because right now you're seeing its habitat. I think it's all, makes sense for you guys to actually see the species profile of Nile monitor right now. So let us go on to that. So I'll get it up on screen now. The Nile monitor species name is of course Varanus niloticus, and here you have a picture of one on screen. It's a lovely little guy. These guys are actually pretty big, so we'll talk about that in a second. But the IUCN status is least concern. They were kind of all over the place. We even have, like, I live in Malaysia here, and we have a similar species called the Asian water monitor. Very similar, but a bit less aggressive, a bit more docile, but also equally quite large. They are large, like I said. Nile monitors can get up to 15 kilograms and about 2.2 meters long. That's what, about 8 feet maybe? I'm not good with the feet to meter conversions. They live, of course, in lakes, rivers and marshes. They kind of have these little burrows along the riverside. They live up to about 20 years, and their diet is almost entirely comprised of small animals and eggs. Essentially anything they can get their mouth around, they will probably try and eat it. They're, the monitors, that's kind of what they do. And let's get into some interesting facts about these guys. So, like I said, one of the largest monitor lizards, not the largest of course, we do have that in the game, that is the Komodo dragon. They are actually quite invasive in the United States, specifically in the Florida Everglades. In fact, the Florida Everglades has a problem with a lot of different invasive species. Burmese pythons, crocodiles, they've got a lot of invasive species down there. So, I don't know, like, they've been there quite a long time too, so I'm not sure, like, at what point they stop being invasive and just are considered native at that point. So, we'll see how that situation pans out. They got this really cool forked tongue which they stick out to kind of smell the air, and they can detect different scents. And one cool thing is that females actually lay their eggs in termite mounds. They dig them out. It's a good incubator, and they can lay up to 60 eggs in there. And that is it for the Nile monitor. Very cool animal. I'm a big fan of monitor species. I would like an Aki monitor maybe one day as a pet. That's kind of the only monitor species I think anyone would really realistically recommend as a pet, because it's quite a small one, does well in captivity. I'm sorry, not captivity in the pet kind of, well, it is captivity, it's just not zoo captivity, if that makes sense. In the zoo, of course, Nile monitors and stuff can get more care, and it's a lot easier for them to thrive. But for an individual to own, I would not suggest a monitor at all. Unless it's an Aki monitor. Those guys are pretty small, pretty cute, and very easy to be kept as pets. So now we're coming closer towards the end of the Nile monitor portion. Of course, now I'm starting to detail the outside of the building, sticking once again to that pale green color that we see a lot of in Sannikovland, because I think it works really well here, and again gives you that riverside feel, and again accents this building as well as something to kind of draw guests towards it. It's got big windows towards the indoor land area, and of course towards the water area as well. It was a bit tricky working in this very tight space, again like I said, not just on the indoor area but also the water area, because it is sandwiched between two paths, and if you guys have played this game you know that the path system can be a little bit difficult to work with, especially when you're trying to use like barriers and other things nearby them. Can be very tricky. But I got it to work, and I am very happy with the results. As a whole, I am very pleased with the Nile monitor habitat. It took me a bit longer than I probably would have liked. It took me almost as long as like a third of the way through the video, almost halfway through actually. And it took me a decent while to get this ready. One thing I am very happy with, of course, is the foliage. I'm always really pleased with the foliage work because adding in foliage to anything is just a surefire way to make it look just 10 times better. And in here, the tropical foliage really helps. I add in a couple more things off screen. Actually, I add in a big broken tree to look like an area the Nile monitor can perch on. Once again, in game they don't really perch on those things because they don't really have the climbing ability, but I think it's nice to just give you that idea that they would be perching on there. Now just adding in a flat roof on top with a little bit of a glass rim to just give it some sunlight, and the top of the roof for this glass area will also be made of glass, well, partially anyways, to once again bring in some light. I think it really helps. Gives it a bit of a greenhouse vibe, I think, which I quite like. And that's pretty much it. Once this roof's in place, just adding in a few more details, adding in an information screen, and that's pretty much it for the Nile monitor section. And then we'll get to work on the rest of the amphitheater, which is going to be pretty big. So let's just talk a little bit about the scale of today's project. I did not intend for it to be a big one. Honestly, I really did not. When I started this, I was planning on making a basic hippo habitat, and suddenly it just kind of blew out of proportion, and bam, here we have the amphitheater. So in the following few episodes, what I kind of intend to do is scale back from the animals slightly. So I was watching a video from Paul Lee, who's another Planet Zoo YouTuber. Amazing channel. He is an absolute pillar of the Planet Zoo community. If you haven't watched any of his videos, please do check them out. His channel's amazing. But I was watching his most recent Zooable video, I believe, and he mentioned that a lot of people do tend to over-focus on the animal habitats while doing builds, not just on YouTube, but just any sort of zoo build, and like people tend to just push out one habitat, then the next habitat, then the next habitat, without really things in between for the guests. And I realized I've been doing that a lot here in Sannikovland, and I would really like to kind of spend some time and work on some guest facilities. So I think the next episode we'll try and dedicate it entirely towards guest facilities, maybe build a restaurant, maybe build a plaza, maybe even a few plazas. I think that's something that would be great, because as far as the guest facilities goes, I think I've only made maybe 2 or 3 episodes dedicated to guests. The most recent of which was the plaza and playground episode of the petting zoo, and I really enjoy building those, so I kind of want to explore that a little bit more. So we'll get into that. Now we finish off the time-lapse section for the Nile monitor habitat. Now we're getting into basically the rest of the amphitheater. Like I said, that Nile monitor habitat took a weird amount of time, so let's ignore that. So first off is quick terrain work around where the hippos are gonna be. Just covering it up with a lot of sand, a lot of soil, and some stone, of course. You know, making it look like a river basin, some grass on the top, but not too much. I want it to look very, very naturalistic. I know this whole area is a bit too square. I will try and fix that later on off screen. But yeah, at the moment, towards the end of the video, it does remain pretty square. Here I'm just building a little bit of a rim for the underwater viewing areas and the glass. Very simple rim, again made out of plaster pieces with a few different colors, and those little sticks which I've been loving for the African section, and this wooden beam. So this will be something I continue and just kind of stretch out across this whole glass area. And it'll take a little bit of time, and while that time is going on, let's talk about our final species profile for today, and my personal favorite, of course, the Pygmy hippo. So the Pygmy hippo actually has 2 different scientific names. The other one is not necessarily completely accepted, so we'll just talk about this one for now, which is Chiropsis libriensis, and it is unfortunately very endangered. There's only about 3,000 Pygmy hippos left, but to counter that, they do really well in captivity and they breed quite well as well. They get up to about 275 kilograms, which is a fraction of the weight of the bigger hippos. In fact, it's about, what, 10% maybe? Maybe about 10%, yeah. And about 1.5 meters long, about 8 feet I think that is. I'm really bad with feet again. Anyways, they live in much more tropical environments than their bigger cousins. Lakes, rivers and marshes of course, but they're much less aquatic. They live up to about 50 years as well, and their diet comprises of leaves, ferns and fruit. And not as much grass as their larger cousins of course, because they do live in forests. There's not as much grass there anyways. Quickly, actually, before we go into the interesting facts, let's look at what's going on screen here. this is something I thought looked quite nice, and that is creating a little bit of a false rock floor here where the gravel is, and I think that looks really, really good. So if you want to do this in your own parks, all you have to do is put down a lot of the cladding pieces and sink them just below the ground so only a tiny bit sticks out, and then layer them and you'll get this kind of look. I thought it looked really nice. I don't know if you guys do. I personally did, so very happy with that. Anyways, quickly moving on to some interesting facts about our pygmy hippos. They are very nocturnal and very shy. They hide away, they're super reclusive, and they're much less aquatic than the common hippo. They live mostly walking on dry land, and you can kind of see that in their posture and their legs. Their legs are a little bit longer and their bodies are less like chunky, but they're still pretty chunky. They breed really well in captivity. Basel Zoo in Switzerland actually has the stud book for them, and they kind of coordinate the trade and captive breeding of the pygmy hippos in zoos, and they do really well. In fact, the common hippo also does pretty well in captivity. So those are two animals that I'm always kind of like okay seeing in zoos. I think they do really well, and most zoos have them in pretty decent habitats. London Zoo has pygmy hippos, and I like seeing them whenever I go there. Their behavior is of course very different from the common hippo, and in fact it's a lot more similar to the tapirs. So back all the way in like episode 3 or 4, we actually did a tapir habitat, and they live very similarly to that. Again, kind of foraging in the forest, in the deep forest, being nocturnal, and of course eating fruits and leaves. It is a very interesting thing because that's an example of convergent evolution, and if you don't know what convergent evolution is when two different species of animal adapt to a similar environment and end up developing similar traits independently. So like dolphins and fish. So for example, they both have flippers, they both have fins, and they kind of evolve those independently because that's just the structure that's most suitable for living in the water. So that's kind of what convergent evolution is. Now going back to what's on screen now that we finished our species profiles for the day. Anyways, I do hope that you've enjoyed learning about the species. I know the species profiles might not be for everyone. More people are probably interested in just the build. But I really like talking about the animals, and I know that quite a lot of you in the comments have said that you do enjoy learning about them too. So, to those of you who do, I'm very glad for it, and I do hope you've enjoyed that as well. And for those of you who don't, I do hope you enjoy the builds anyways, because they're still a big part of the videos. Anyways, going back to screen, which I said a second ago but completely forgot to. So we just finished up most of the foliage for the interiors of the hippo habitats. Again, a very arid kind of foliage, but also mixed with the aquatic foliage like the reeds and the floating lily pads, of course. I think it looks really nice. The acai palms also give a very nice kind of riverside look to the whole habitat area. And now what we're going to be doing is making a little bit of a shop area. Once again, going back to what I said earlier about not focusing enough on the guests, I wanted to give this area more of a bit of a staff presence so that guests can get some amenities, get some cash out. There'll be some ATMs nearby, they can go use the loo, and of course they can go buy some stuff from the shops here, which I've put in 2 of them, an information booth for them to get like maps or buy adoption packages, stuff like that, maybe even an audio guide. And then they also have a little slushie shop, of course. They can buy slushies, or maybe an ice cream shop, I don't know. Whatever it is, they can get a nice little cold treat, and they can sit down on all these little picnic tables that I'll add in a little bit. And this shop area also serves as another entrance, so I'm building a bit of an archway here. Making use of the painted brick because we haven't used that much in this park, if at all, and I think it's pretty cool, so using some painted brick. Sticking with the slate roofs, I quite like the slate roofs, and we have used them throughout the zoo in different places, and I think they just look quite good. Once again, I do have that whole idea of kind of having rustic and modern architecture kind of meeting in a harmonious way, so that's what I'm trying to do here. And with this shop, it is pretty simple. Again, very similar to all my other shops. If you guys want this, of course, it will be in the workshop in a few weeks' time whenever I do my 3rd asset release for Sannikovland. I hope you guys are enjoying the second one, by the way. It has quite a few subscribers down the workshop, a few hundred I think. So I hope you guys do enjoy the assets from the last one. do include loads of my canopies there. I know there's some people who really like my canopy work, so thank you very much for that, and I'm glad I can share them with you in the workshop, and there will be more in the future, of course. Now, for all these buildings, I've noticed one thing that really helps them look a bit more realistic is to add in these little pillars and stuff like that. So here I'm adding some brick pillars. It doesn't have to be like evenly spaced even, as long as they kind of like in what you might think to be structurally, what does that word be? Sorry, structurally important locations, they kind of make sense and they look pretty good. So here I'm just adding in a few accent pieces for the building with some planks, and also it helps cover up some areas. And these lovely canopy pieces, I didn't realize them, but that green looks so good. I'm just such a big fan of that. Once again, sticking with Sannikov colors, the warm grey, the pale green, the yellows. I'm really a big fan of this color scheme that we've been developing for Sannikovland. Here, quickly just adding in a few education panels. Here you'll see, you may have noticed actually a second ago that I couldn't change the screens. That's actually a bug that I encounter with the game every once in a while, and I'll have to reset the game when I do, where I'm suddenly unable to edit any item that requires editing, like can't add text to signs, can't do any of that. So that's just a bug that happens every once in a while, but not major at all, and I don't mind, because all it requires is just a reset of the game and everything's fine. So not fussed at all. Here I'm just changing up the ramp a bit. Once again, trying to focus on making sure everywhere is disability accessible. The only part of this amphitheater that isn't accessible is the absolute bottom layer. But because the bottom layer is a very small area anyways, and it's not necessarily the focal point, not for the guests anyways, I didn't think it would be super important to add one right now. I'll probably add one in the future, a little ramp. But right now, that absolute bottom layer, that tiny bit, is only stair accessible. I will again work to change it at some point, probably just off screen between episodes. But yeah, I feel like that's something that's really important. Again, going back to that other YouTuber, Paul Lee, he does this thing where he makes sure that every single one of his builds is always accessible, and it's such a good thing to be doing, and I really like doing it as well. So very keen on making sure that all of them are accessible. Here a couple of just staff doors, again for the people, for the staff, sorry. One thing I thought was a bit odd is the placement of those staff doors. Maybe I should place them somewhere less conspicuous because they're right up front. But I couldn't think of a better place to put them, so yeah, that's where they ended up. Here you're going to start seeing me essentially trim out these big platforms here where I'm going to put the picnic tables, just to make them look nice and get rid of the path border. Once again, plaster pieces come to the rescue. Plaster pieces are the best, and I will not be taking any debate. They're the best. They just are. Like, I cannot think of a piece that is more versatile than the plaster piece. It flat out is the best. Here I'm building something weird actually. I didn't know how to fill in this gap between the path and the glass, so I decided to build what essentially amounts to a much lower guest path that guests can actually walk on. I mean, theoretically, of course, they can't actually walk on this because the game doesn't recognize the path. But I thought a little artificial path with some little fake stairs would be pretty good, and they can go up there and access both this upper layer and the bottom layer. So it looks pretty okay towards the end. I'm not saying it's like it looks perfectly seamless or anything, but it looks okay. Adding a couple of planters. These aloe vera plants work really well to add in a little bit of color here. And here I'm decided to use these African picnic tables instead of the ones we have been using. I think they just look really nice. They're very, I don't know, I just quite like the shape of them. They look quite modern despite the fact that they're quite heavily themed. Adding some bins as well. And now we come to what is kind of the defining feature and why you might have clicked on this thumbnail. We are going to build the canopy. And the canopy is going to be a bit of a weird one. It's going to be a very modern looking, like kind of modern artish looking weird thing that's going to be arching right over the whole of the amphitheater. And these sort of structures, you do see them a lot in amphitheaters and similar types of buildings. I think they look so cool, and even if they're not the most like maybe thematically appropriate, I think they work really well because they just add so much interest. And the one I'm building today is going to be a blend of, once again, modern architecture with the use of the girders with the rustic architecture, which we'll use some wood pieces to achieve in a bit. working with this was a little bit difficult. I had to use a couple different techniques. The first technique being the dome technique. The first one actually being the circle technique, so rotating around that central gridded piece. And the second technique would be to flip it and then use the dome technique. But I think it turns out looking pretty cool. Here I struggled a little bit because I couldn't think of what piece of wood would be best. So you see me struggling. I looked through the plank pieces, the wooden log pieces. They were either always too big or too small, basically. The perfect piece ended up being the timber piece and not these tiny sticks that you see here. It was actually the timber piece. I ended up using it. But I did struggle a little bit because, as you can see here, the rotation is a tiny bit off between the two edge segments. So I'd have to like individually rotate and place each piece of wood, which was a bit tedious, but I think it was absolutely worth it for the end result. And the end result I think looks pretty cool. So you're going to see that in a bit, and then of course we'll introduce our hippos, and I actually spent some time building a staff building as well and a couple other things, but because because of the absolute length of video this was going to be, the original time-lapse was going to be, I think, nearly an hour long, and I did not want to, make an hour-long video. 45 minutes or so was about what I was happy with, so I cut out a bunch of stuff that didn't think was super necessary, like the staff buildings. There were just a little staff building where you could access the hippos. You'll see them in the cinematics nonetheless. Here you see me just doubling up the girders. But yeah, just speaking of the video, this is probably the video that took the longest to render for me ever, because the time lapse actually ended up cutting out a lot of stuff, and the original videos were really long, like really long, and it took me a record 17 hours to render the time lapse. I'm not joking, 17 hours. I had to leave my computer on overnight and throughout the following day because it took that long to render this, which is why I'm very excited to be getting a new computer at some point. I'm going to be trying to build one late in October. That's mainly for university really, because I'm going to be doing some video editing, I think, on my science communication course. But it should also be a bonus that it can deal with Planet Zoo a lot better and my video rendering software. So, which I use DaVinci Resolve, and it's a great software. It's not the software's fault, it's just my computer can't really handle it that well. But yeah, here is the almost complete canopy. And you might think, Jay, that looks really thin. And I say to you, do not worry, we will be expanding this quite significantly. And by quite significantly, I mean we're going to be rotating it using the dome technique to kind of create a little bit of an umbrella. Kind of. Half an umbrella, I guess. Here you just see me again testing out a few different support ideas for the front. I ended up going with a very simple kind of like V shape, I believe. It kind of looks pretty straightforward, nothing too complex. I don't actually use this middle structure here that you see. This is just kind of and for me to get the idea of what to do with it. Then I brought it to the side and I kind of shaped it into a V shape. Yep, here I'm doing it. A little bit of a V there, and then I needed to rotate it to the other side. Perfect. And now I can delete two straight ones, and there we go. Now I can rotate it like that, and rotate it again. Bam! There we go. And you can already see just by rotating it and getting those duplicates, it looks so good. And here we are placing it. And this just brings the whole area together. I think it looks absolutely spectacular. I am so happy with these. I've already blueprinted them, so they will be out with the next asset release as well. If you guys want to use them, that'll be in a few weeks' time. But I am thrilled with how they turned out. They look so good. They were a bit tricky because they did fall into a few buildings, like the Nile monitor habitat. But just with cutting them out and adding in like a simple metal piece to look like a base, I think that helps a lot. And yeah, they just so pleased with this. This was like basically the part of the build that I was happiest with. I think it just looks great. It is a bit tricky to use in your parks if you are going to use them in the future, just because of the what was I about to say? Just because of the legs, you never know where they're going to land, and they might land on a building or something. So, but very easy solve. Here I'm actually using those same pieces to create shelters for our animals, for the hippos. So I made a larger one for the common hippos, and I cut this down by 1 segment for the pygmy hippos. So they both kind of like arch out from behind the hippo habitats and lean over into them to provide them with a good bit of shelter. And I think it looks great. I think it really helps with the just tying the habitat into the amphitheater some more to kind of bring in that cohesiveness, I guess. That was the word I'm looking for. I don't know. But yeah, here's the pygmy hippo version, which is of course just a little bit smaller, getting rid of the middle legs. And there we go, just placing it in. I think these shelters look pretty good. They're not enclosed shelters, but again, off screen I did build some staff buildings behind them, and those staff buildings have animal doors, so you can imagine that maybe if the hippos wanted a fully enclosed shelter, they can just walk back there, and that would be much more enclosed where the staff could look after them and stuff like that. Here I'm just adding in some enrichment, of course. I love these mud pits because the hippos get really muddy and cute when they're in there, so I put in 1 or 2 of these for both of them. I'm using leaves instead of the hay for bedding because I wanted this area to look a bit more naturalistic. I also love these metal waterfall pieces. I last used them for the elephant, and now I'm using them here for the pygmy hippos and the actual hippos. Why did I say actual hippos? It's not like pygmy hippos are fake hippos, they're still hippos, so for the pygmy hippos and the common hippos. And of course other little bits and pieces of enrichment, sprinklers, rubbing pads, etc. The big gyro logs, I don't know what they're called, but the hippos love them as well. And here we are at the end of the video, of course. So I just want to say to you guys, thank you so much for watching. Thanks for sitting through this ridiculously long video. I hope you've enjoyed it. I really enjoyed talking to you guys about these animals, and I really loved making this build. So I would absolutely love your support. I'm very excited for the future of Planet Zoo. I know we're getting a DLC, and well, we're getting an update for sure. I don't know if we're getting a DLC. I think we are. So looking forward to that as well. And yeah, thank you so much for watching, guys. Please do leave a comment down below, let me know what you think, and subscribe if you want to see more Planet Zoo content. We'll be back with more Sannikovland next week, and like the video if you liked today's video. And with that all said, I want to say once again, big thank you to you guys. We're almost at 700 subscribers, so huge thanks. And of course, before I forget, I always forget to plug this, go join our Discord server. We chat about Planet Zoo, hang out, and just kind of hang out with like-minded people. So yeah. Anyways, thanks for watching, guys, and I will see you in the next one. Bye, guys.